All right, welcome to another exciting episode of the Sopranopreneur podcast. I am your host, Mike Ficara. Excited you are here today, enjoying once again another Omerta cigar. Once again, not sponsoring the show. You never know, maybe in the future. No, but just love this cigar. Obviously, from several cast members from The Sopranos, who we haven't seen yet in episode 2, but we're going to start to see in later episodes, particularly Jackie Aprile, Beansy. And we'll see a couple of those guys leading the way there. First off, a couple of things, just housekeeping. Thank you to everybody who's followed the page, who supported us on Spotify. We're on every podcasting platform now, so you can find us everywhere that podcasts are. So make sure that you subscribe to the podcast wherever you enjoy listening to them. Also on YouTube as well, and then it followed us on the Instagram account. So a lot of exciting things happening there. Like I said, with the Omerta cigar, going to enjoy that a little bit today during the show. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that I'm really excited about is I'm going to say this because it's not finalized yet, but it looks like we're going to get some cast members on, which is going to be awesome. Talk about the episodes they were in, as well as some of the things about Sopranos and business. We're going to have that. So I've reached out to a couple of the cast members that have actually been very gracious. So I think we're going to have some things there. So really excited about that. So stay tuned for that as we move forward. As we're recording this, we just celebrated Dre De Matteo's birthday the other day. So happy birthday to her. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. And really just the 25th anniversary around The Sopranos. It's amazing how much buzz there's been. Everything from on social media. We know Meadow and AJ, Jamie Lynn Sigler, and AJ Sparrow, Robert Eiler, they have their own podcast called Not Today, Pal, which they talked about the 25th anniversary and some of their thoughts on the episodes. Fans even sent in questions and they answered them. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you do that. A lot of great podcasts too out there in the Sopranos universe. So make sure that you go and listen to those and support those as well. If you're a Sopranos fan and you haven't, I highly recommend listening to anything that Jamie, Lim, and Robert have done. They've done a couple great podcasts together. And of course, Talking Sopranos is probably the Bible, if you will, there with Steve Sharippa and Michael Imperioli talking about the episodes. I've actually started watching those. Now I'm kind of changing my format a little bit of how I'm prepping for these podcasts. I'm watching Talking Sopranos first. Then I'm watching the episode and taking the notes for the entrepreneurial messages. But it's been interesting to hear some of the behind the scenes things and some of the tidbits. So also throw those in as I remember them into some of the episodes and share those with you as well. Because I think it's really the evolution of the show, if you will, right? We're going to see Jackie Aprile be kind of a key role here in this episode. And really this is kind of his big episode, if you will. This one and the next one really focused a lot around Jackie Aprile and his cancer battle and what he's going through. And we know he was up for the role of Tony Soprano. So for those of you who don't know, Jackie Aprile was actually up for the role of Tony Soprano and did not get it, but obviously played a pivotal role in the show. And we're going to see Jackie referred to a lot throughout the season. There's also some flashbacks that he appears in as well. And obviously Jackie Jr., who we talked about with Omerta Cigars, there's a big thing that sort of played into with that. So I was really excited about this episode specifically, watching it. Listening to Talking Sopranos actually reminded me a lot of there's a lot of entrepreneurial themes in this one because we see this is really the first time we see a full business deal negotiated. Yes, we had Comley Trucking in the previous ones, and we had sort of the garbage deal in the previous episode as well that we saw happen in episode 1. The Triborough Towers garbage deal. So we saw that, but this is really a business to business deal. We see Tony negotiate. We see negotiations go wrong. We see him solve the negotiations, and we see something that's going to be set up, the ownership in the hotel that they're going to get. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But that's going to be something that plays out when we see the executive game later on in further episodes, which play a big role in The Sopranos, the whole executive game. We're going to see that as well. Once again, you may hear some spoilers in here. And side note as well, something that I heard on, I didn't hear it on Talking Sopranos, but I heard it, I believe, on another podcast where David Chase was saying that was kind of his way to get all these celebrities wanted to be on The Sopranos, and he could only fit so many in, but the executive card game was a great way to do that. We know Frank Sinatra Jr. was on, a lot of big names, some NFL players were on there as well, so it was really a great opportunity for him to kind of sneak stars in, if you will, to the show. But let's get into it. Obviously, we opening scene is Chris and Brendan returning the truck to Comley. And they're playing dumb. Hey, we don't know what happened. We found this truck on the side of the road. We thought we'd bring it back to you. They know very well what happened. And Chris is kind of up there in the front leading. Once again, we see Chris leading in this situation. So Chris is a leader in his department. Brendan's back there honking the horn. The guys come out. They say, hey, what's going on? Chris shoots a gun to kind of scare them, if you will. And he says it's a gift from Tony Soprano. So we see sort of the hierarchy, if you will, the structures of everything going on. And we see this gift being returned. But we know, too, Tony's going to get credit for it. And why these guys are like, hey, man, there's the guys that killed the driver. They're going to get away with it, right? Nothing's really going to happen. And Conley is actually thankful. And we hear Junior and Mikey. It cuts to a scene right after they return it of Junior and Mikey talking about the return of the truck. And obviously, once again, we talked about this a little bit at the end of the previous episode, the instability with the teams here, right? We have people siloed, doing their own things in all these different departments. And more importantly, they're not communicating well and they're not interacting well, which is causing an issue, right? And we talked about that, how in your business and your organization, when businesses are siloed, and I had this conversation with someone today about a business growing to $100 million business, and the growth happens so rapidly, and there's a lot going on. Sometimes growth in a business can be painful. All these guys want power and success. Junior, Tony, Christopher, they all kind of want to be in the captain's chair, the leadership chair, if you will. But the stress of success really overwhelms them. Even after Brendan and Christopher returned the truck, they talk about this. Brendan's like, we returned our biggest score. And Chris is like, well, what are you going to do? We're going to get screwed, right? Everybody wants that top seat, so they feel like they're not getting screwed. But there's a lot of responsibility that comes with being in charge, right? There's a lot of responsibility that comes with being in the leadership position or being in the leadership role, and there's a lot that goes with that. But I really want to dig into now, kind of stepping away from that, is the theme of this episode. And the title of episode 3 is Denial, Anger, and Acceptance. And we know this is all, once again, like I talked about a few minutes ago, surrounding Jackie's death and how Tony is dealing with it, right? We're focusing on now Tony and everything Jackie's going through with cancer. We're going to see Jackie deteriorate in his cancer. And we're also going to see Tony, sort of his thoughts on this, and the denial, anger, and acceptance he goes through with this. But we also see that as a theme of everything Tony does. And we're going to see this as a theme, I think, that most business owners have, right? You go through denial. Hey, I've got a great idea. This is going to be great. Everything's working out. Everything's happening. Then sometimes we see everything's not well, right? We saw that with Comley and a lot of other things. We get frustrated. There's anger. What's going on? Why isn't anyone listening? I can't tell you how many business owners I've worked with. They're like, man, I just can't believe, having employees is a lot and all this stuff going on is a lot. There's anger, there's frustration, then eventually there's acceptance, which is usually followed by a plan of action or what happens next. So while this is going to be dealing with death and dying, I think it's important that we look at the stage of anger, denial, anger, and acceptance as business owners, right, and as leaders, because this happens to us regularly. I don't think, and this is something as a young entrepreneur, I always thought you reach a status, like you have the up and down, and you have the roller coaster, whatever you want to call it, or the pivot, and then you have stability, but that never really happens, right? These stages of denial, anger, and acceptance are ongoing, and chaos is ongoing. It's how you live through those different stages that's going to make you successful, because that's never going to go away. I talked about it. Whether you're doing $100 in your business, $100,000, or $100 million, there's always going to be these stages of denial. Wow, can I really do this? Maybe it's imposter syndrome. Anger, man, things aren't going the way I thought they were going to go. And then acceptance of like, wow, yeah, I could do this, and this is the plan to make it happen. But acceptance always has to be followed with a plan. I think if acceptance isn't followed with a plan, that's where the real problems are, and that's where things go wrong. So let's cut to the scene where Tony's in the office with Dr. Melfi, and there's a couple things. Tony's looking at a picture in the lobby, and he sees this picture, and it's going to come up in the conversation with him and Melfi, but he thinks the picture's tricking him, and him and Melfi really get into almost an argument about this, about hey, well, what does that picture mean? I think it's some sort of bullshit picture where, it's smart people trying to say, fuck you, we're smarter than you. Tony gets really frustrated, not anger in dealing with Jackie's stuff, but frustrated that there's a hidden message. And I think once again, this goes back to business owners, the outside influences. And this goes to something I think I've said on every episode now, because it's such a resounding theme. I don't like the prove your haters wrong cliche. You can see my book behind me, like Socks on a Rooster, that I wrote. It's about busting entrepreneurial cliches that are holding you back. And I think that's one of the biggest ones, because what happens is you make stuff up in your head that other people are saying that really just isn't true, and it's taking you off being focused of where you need to be at. So I think that idea of that things are out there to trick you or fool you, or I've heard a lot of times too, well, what if somebody steals my idea, or I feel like there's people talking about me behind my back. You can't worry about that stuff. You got to focus on what your goals and what your direction are moving forward. And one of the things too, I talked about Christopher wanting to be in that seat of success. We all know Tony's in this seat of power, but he's never happy with it. And we're going to see this a lot throughout the show. And one of the things Melby says to him is like, hey, how are things going? So it's like, things are great. Everything's great. I'm having a great week. Business is good. Yeah, everything's going really well. But you can see his body language. He's kind of like slunched over a little bit. He's legs are crossed. He's shaking his foot. He's picking at his shoe. His body language says otherwise. So a lot of times we can tell people we're great, but the tale of who we are is really being told through our physical actions in our body. And I think that's true of character of people as well, too, right? We hear a lot of people say that people like to work with people they know, like, and trust. And to know, like, and trust somebody means that what they're saying is also visible in their actions, but more importantly, visible in who they are in their presence, right? You can tell when somebody is lying to you, and when someone is telling the truth. And they start to kind of talk about Jackie and his cancer. And Melfi says, well, how bad is his cancer? And Tony says, well, I'm not worried about it. Jackie's so mean, he'll beat that cancer. He'll scare it away. And Tony's in denial that Jackie's going to get over this cancer. And as he's talking to it about Melfi, he's kind of asking her opinion. We're going to see this come up a little bit later. But, he really is in denial of how bad Jackie's cancer actually really is. He probably has, weeks, if not, days left to be able to live. And we cut to a scene of actually Jackie in the hospital, and he seems pretty good. He's lying in the bed, he's talking, he's coherent of what's going on. And when we cut to the scene, Mikey Palmisi's in there, and he's talking kind of like, hey, you see if they have air, you ever get air in your IV, because air could kill you. And he's talking about another guy that has cancer and how bad it is. It's not as bad as yours, because he's got it's eating away his brain. He's just one of these like negative presence, and we're going to see this about Mikey as we go along. And Mikey's going to kind of be the villain, if you will, of the season. But he's always negative, right? But he's this guy that, nicely dressed, Junior's number 2, but he's always got this negative black cloud, and he's always saying things that are bad, and no one really wants him around. Even when he leaves the room, Jackie turns, he's like, man, this guy, like, he's like a black cloud. He literally says it, that he's, he knows everyone, with cancer, and all he wants to do is talk about it, So you don't really want people like that in your organization as well. I think it's important to take inventory of who people are. Well, Mikey's inherently good at what he does in Junior's crew. He's not good to have around. He's not a positive force, and no one really wants him. And in some ways, that may be why he ended up with Junior. Is that no one else really wanted him, so he ended up kind of in Junior's crew. Silvio then, they kind of turned to Hesh, and they're talking about, everything going on, and they said, you're lucky to be Jewish. And Silvio's like, oh yeah, that reminds me. And this is where the business deal comes in. There's a guy named Shlomo. He's a Hasidic Jew. And he wants to get a divorce for his daughter, but he's not able to get it. So he really wants to turn to the mob, if you will, or sort of outsource it to them, if they will, to rough up his son-in-law and get the divorce. Now, Hesh, who's very familiar with the Hasidic Jews because he's actually Jewish, says, listen, guys, you don't want to do this. Avoid this like the plague. This really isn't a good idea. This isn't something that you want to do. And he's discouraging the guys from doing this. Why? Because he understands the situation. Hesh is someone who's around kind of as, Silvio is Tony's consigliere, but Hesh is around as kind of like an advisor as well, because he understands a lot of things. He's wise. He knows a lot of things that are kind of bringing him in to consult on this. And the deal that's kind of on the table is 25% of the hotel and 25K is kind of the deal that's on the table. So, they're kind of talking about this as a group, and we're in sort of phase 1 of the negotiation. I call it the brainstorming, or the initial deal being brought up. Hey, do we want to accept this? Do we want to do this? And I love this because all the guys are listening. Everyone's hearing things. Hesh is saying kind of stay away from it. Jackie should kind of be leading the deal, but we know he's really sick, so he's not. So Tony's kind of stepping up, and he's listening to it. And while everybody's kind of, on the fence on what should be done, Tony's going to ultimately have the decision, and we're going to see this in a few minutes. We cut now to a very interesting scene, though, of Tony and Carmela go to Artie and Charmaine's new house. And it seems like Artie has had to downscale his house. If you remember in episode 1, Tony blew up the restaurant. Artie doesn't have the restaurant anymore, so he's in a bad financial situation. And the problem is that Tony has guilt about this. And I don't want to say the problem is, but the thing of it is Tony has guilt around this. So him and Carmela go over there. Remember what I talked about with Tony's house? Tony's house for him is the ultimate status of success. And he's going to say this at one point in therapy. Look at my house. Look at what I've done. I've talked about it being in the beginning credits, how that's where it ends. Everything he goes through ends at his house, which is kind of like his trophy, if you will. So Carmela, too, feels that way as well. And Carmela, we'll get into this at some point, kind of just being there, if you will. And I'm no way downplaying the housewife and mother role. She does a lot. But it's always going to be the question of, and Tony's going to bring this up, Carmela's parents are going to bring this up, that she's kind of rode Tony's coattails to the success, but she also sees the house of a status symbol, and she's in there, and she's almost looking down on Charmaine, but then she's saying all these nice things. Oh, it's so cozy. Oh, it's so lovely. But she's criticizing in her, and she's looking down on her, and there's that lack of authenticity. Remember when I talked about in business that know, like, and trust? It doesn't matter what you say. It matters how you are in your actions and what you do, and this is going to come up a little bit later as we go through. We see, too, that Tony and Artie are kind of in the garage, and you can tell Tony's talking to him. Artie's fixing a leak. Artie's kind of like, hey, it is what it is. I'm not going to get the insurance money for the restaurant. Tony's like, why? We got to go through a second arson investigation. And Tony now feels really good. He's like, wait, why? What do they think? You're mobbed up? It was a mob hit. Tony almost confesses to doing it. But Artie's like, I don't know. They think there's something wrong and they want to look into it. So Artie is now in this terrible position because of Tony. And Tony feels a little bit of guilt because of that. And even Carmela doesn't feel guilt, but she feels like she wants to help them, but she's almost doing it as a pity charity, right? I mean, I've seen this a lot where people do charity because they think it's good, but they're actually doing it for their own status. And we're going to see that come up in a little bit. So we cut to the next scene. A lot of jumping around here too, which is interesting. So I'm going to jump back and forth between some of these storylines. But Shlomo and Tony kind of meet to talk about the deal, and we see Shlomo's there with his son. Tony's there with Hesh, Paulie, Silvio, and they're talking about negotiating the deal. But it's Tony and Shlomo who are kind of the leaders of the main men talking about what they want to do. And Tony, I love the way Tony negotiates. He's like, look, first of all, understand some things here. I'm in the carting waste management, so he almost downplays what he does. Like I'm in the garbage business. There's a way for me to help your family that would make me happy. So he's saying that he could help him, but he's still maintaining this like I'm not needy here. You're the one that's needy. He's immediately downplaying the situation to be in a position of power, and I love this as a negotiation tactic because a lot of times, when I've seen a lot of business owners come in and they're trying to sell a product or they're trying to sign a client, and we got to pitch them, we got to wow them, we got to seem bigger than we are, we got to do all these things. They're overplaying their hand. Tony underplays his hand and actually ends up getting the upper hand. So he kind of plays a little bit humble, and gets Shlomo to kind of know, like, and trust him in some ways. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is what make me happy. This is what make you happy. And he kind of goes from there. And the son-in-law kind of chimes in, and I love this because there's a couple other times where people will chime in. We talked about Jackie Jr. There's another negotiation I'll talk about, but the son wants 50% of the hotel. Shlomo doesn't want to give that to him. Tony says, look, I'll do it for 25%. Then let's split the difference. I'll get done what you need to get done. I'll get you the divorce or what's called a get. And I'll do that. The son's not happy with it. But Tony's able to close this deal with Shlomo. And the thing is too, and the next thing we cut to is Paulie and Silvio going to the hotel to talk to Ariel, who is the son-in-law, and they're getting the deal. So why Tony agrees to it, he negotiates the deal, he gets everything done. He's actually going to benefit most from the deal. He actually sends Paulie and Silvio to negotiate that deal, which I think is pretty interesting. So it's really interesting to see Tony negotiating the deal, closing the deal, but he's not doing all the work. He's delegating it out, which is what a good leader does. They delegate out the task, and I love that he does that. So next we see Tony and Carmela. They're going to have the fundraiser, and Carmela says, hey, I want to hire Artie and Charmaine. And remember what I talked about a little bit ago about charity? It's almost a pity hire. I kind of want to pity hire them. She really doesn't care about them. She just wants to kind of pity hire them, which is very interesting. Tony's like, why are we doing this? Why are we opening up our house? This isn't who we are. He's like, this isn't what we do. Like, why are we doing this? And he's a little bit frustrated, but you can tell Carmela doesn't have sort of the best intentions, if you will. She's doing it for sort of status, and we'll even see at the party there's a lot of people there because of status. We also hear too, Meadows in the other room. She's playing some really loud music. Her and Hunter are studying for the SATs, and she's actually trying to score drugs from Christopher in order to be able to stay up and focus and do what they need to do. We know too, status is very important in the Soprano household. So Meadow wants to get into a good school. We're going to see too in future episodes. Carmela really wants her to get into that good school, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on her. I'm not going to get into it on this episode because I think it's something to dive into, but the importance of college and the pressure of that. And Tony obviously says everything he does for his kids, but there's a lot of ego involved here. And she goes to Chris for help, and Chris realizes too that Tony will kill him if he gives his daughter drugs. And we're going to see it show up, and he's like, absolutely not, no way. And then Chris's girlfriend hears this phone call and kind of the ask, and she's like, well, they would go somewhere else and they would end up getting killed. So really doesn't want to do that. Really doesn't want to partake in that. And so Meadow ends up leaving his apartment. And once again, I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but then Tony's back in Dr. Melfi's office, and now we're here at the anger portion of things. Jackie's sort of getting a little bit worse, and he's asking Dr. Melfi, well, you're a doctor, which she's not a medical doctor, she's a psychologist, so it's kind of funny. Goes to show you a little bit of Tony's misappropriation. I think it's funny how he went to Hesh to figure out what to do about this situation. We're going to see him turn to Hesh again later, who's kind of an expert. It was right to go to him, but now he's asking Melfi for a medical diagnosis of Jackie's cancer, while she's a psychologist, which makes no sense. So sometimes we outsource good in business. Sometimes we outsource bad. But one of the things he asked her is, what do you think? And she gives her opinion, and he gets really angry. He gets really angry, and he gets really frustrated in her diagnosis. And this is kind of the anger stage. So angry that he says, fuck you, and he walks out of the office, right? So it's the ultimate sort of anger and frustration. We see, too, then we cut to a scene where Chris is now going to give Meadow the drugs. So even though she went to his apartment, she asked him, Chris is kind of taking Adriana's advice, his girlfriend's advice here, because he doesn't want her to go somewhere and try to score it and actually get hurt. And he says, but listen, your dad will kill me if I give you this. And that's obviously going to show up a little bit later on. Then we see Artie and Charmaine kind of preparing for the fundraiser in their kitchen in their new home. And Artie's calling Charmaine a hypocrite. How could you take this deal? How could you take money from the Sopranos to cater this party when you wouldn't let Tony give me money to fix the restaurant, or you wouldn't let me go into business with Tony? And there's this argument there. She's like, that's different. She goes, that's a long-term thing. I'm helping Carmela for a charity here, and it's a good cause, which even Charmaine's in a little bit of denial there. I think everyone with this charity event is in some form of denial. And denial is a very weird thing, right? Because she's justifying what she's doing. She won't let Artie do it, but they're basically doing the same things. And it's a very tough thing in business, right? Because I think there's a thin line between what you can do and what you should do. And what's going to allow your business to grow is a very, very thin line. And Artie and Charmaine are kind of arguing about this on, hey, what's the best solution here? What's the best thing that we could do to be successful? And they're really going back and forth on that line and what that looks like. And then we cut to the fundraiser. So it's in Carmela's house, and the first scene in the fundraiser is Carmela's like, how do you think the air is in the room? Do you think everyone's okay? Do you think they're having a good time? And she's with another lady, not a really main character, just someone that shows. She goes, oh, I don't know. I was so busy schmoozing. I didn't even know how to eat. So here's these people acting like they care, raising money for a children's hospital, when all they care about is the people in the room and impressing and schmoozing other people. So they're doing it for the wrong reasons. In business, it's so important to do things for the right reasons. And one of the things we see is Carmela was acting like she was Charmaine's friend, but then she wants her to try the hors d'oeuvres now, and she sort of does this hand motion to bring Charmaine over, which is something she did to her maid in an earlier scene, and is really kind of belittling to Charmaine. And you see Charmaine, who was also kind of mingling and meeting people and schmoozing, and now she's been kind of downgraded to the help, and it's really frustrating. And then we cut to Tony and Artie in the kitchen. Tony says, man, I hate this. I don't know why I have all these people in my house. I don't want to be here. And Artie, kind of frustrated that he's catering a party instead of cooking in a restaurant, is like, well, what do you have him for? He's talking about how much he misses his restaurant and how tough things are for him. And Tony's like, hey, suck it up and get over it. Now, Tony's saying this because he feels guilty and he doesn't want to hear Artie basically saying this stuff anymore. But at the end of the day, it's Tony's fault that Artie's in this position. So because it's Tony's fault that Artie's in this position, he's kind of getting frustrated. But it's also true. Artie's in a tough time in his business right now. We're all going to be in tough times in our business. But if we wallow and we complain and we whine and we're not doing anything proactive to be better, even when there's an opportunity in front of us, this opportunity for Artie, maybe you can get there's someone at that party that can find his restaurant. But what is he doing? He's in the kitchen moping, right? Charmaine's now moping as she's serving the hors d'oeuvres. And maybe she did have a deal that was going on, but because Carmela belittled her, she gets frustrated. They're missing opportunities because they're focusing on what they don't have instead of what they do have. And in business, we can't focus on what we don't have, because if we focus on what we don't have, we're going to miss out. We got to focus on what we do have and where we're going. In business, if we focus on what we do have and where we're going, that's where you're going to be the most successful. That's where the success lies. But if Artie and Charmaine, or even Tony and Carmela, if you're focusing on what you don't have in the moment, you're missing out on what you do have. And we're going to see that as such a resounding theme going through here, and as we continue to go throughout the episode. And obviously, Tony and Artie Artie. That's Entourage, my other favorite show. Tony and Artie are arguing, and they actually end up in a food fight. And everybody sort of then steps out and goes into this moment of happiness, right? Tony starts laughing, Artie starts laughing. They're throwing food. They're almost like they're kids again. And Tony and Artie were actually friends when they were kids. And Carmela's kind of looking on, smiling. So they're all actually now out of this element where they're trying to impress everybody, where they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing in a sense. And it turns out everybody's actually the happiest. They all think they're going to be happiest if everybody recognizes them for their status, but they're actually happiest when they revert to this, almost like when they were kids, when there was no problems, when it was just about being together and having a good time. And there's something to say about that. In your business, it's important to find the moments where when you're getting frustrated or you're trying to overly impress people, try to get back to the moments of happiness. That's really, really important. All right, so now kind of party's over, if you will. We cut to Paulie and Silvio. They're trying to get Ariel, and the way to do this is they throw him in the trunk of a car, they take him to a room, and they're basically beating the crap out of him, and he's not breaking. So they call Tony, they call the boss because something was delegated to them. It's not working. So now they go to the boss and they say, hey, listen, boss, we did what you told us to do, but it's not working. So he's like, all right, I got to come. So he comes down there and he assesses the situation. And I love this. This is a typical thing in the business process. Things aren't going the way we thought. Our boss negotiated a deal for us. They gave us a task. It's been delegated. It's not working now. You bring in the boss to reassess the situation. So now Tony is back in charge. Silvio was kind of in charge in there, and he's looking at it saying, what's going on? And Ariel says something to him. He says, the Jews chose death over enslavement from the Romans. He's quoting a biblical verse. He's standing his ground. And Ariel, now let's look at him a little bit. And he talks about everything. He says, look, he goes, I worked in this business for 20 years. I built this from the ground up. He goes, I know he wants a divorce, but I gave her anything she wanted. She wanted to go to Israel. She wanted plastic surgery. He talks about everything he gave her. He talks about everything he put in the hotel. And as business owners, we all feel like Ariel sometimes, right? We poured everything into this business, and we feel like all these outside forces are sometimes trying to kill us. But we're not going to give up. We're not going to quit. We're not going to choose this. And more importantly, we're not going to choose enslavement to our business and who we are. I think that's really important to look at, because a lot of people can let their business control their entire lives, and then they're not going to be happy. Even as he's talking about this, he's smiling a little bit, thinking like, yeah, man, I've done it. I'm not giving up. And I think that's really a credit to Ariel. Even though he's in this terrible situation, he's not giving up. And once again, we know that Shlomo mentioned that he had been physically abusive to his daughter, which there was never any proof of that. So I'm in no way condoning that at all. But I think it's important to look at Ariel and kind of where he is and what he's doing. So Tony kind of calls Hesh, and he says, hey, man, what do I do? So Tony goes back to the expert, right? Which is smart, right? Because the deal didn't work out. The client, if you will, or the task is not working out. So now he has to go to Hesh and get more advice. And Hesh kind of gives him a piece of advice there on what to do to kind of close the deal, if you will, which is kind of finishes brisk. And that actually does close the deal. So Tony is able to come in, get it done, but he goes back to delegating. He tells Paulie to go to the car, get his clippers, and redelegates the deal, which is ironic after he closes that deal. And we're going to talk about it in a second. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. He goes to a hotel, and Shlomo doesn't want to give him what he deserves. He says, "Look, my son, he wanted 50. He agreed to 25 now. He agreed to 15%. So I'm going to give him 15%, and I'm going to give you 15%, and that's where we're going to go." So he's trying to basically screw Tony out of the what he owes him, and Tony's not having it. He says, "Look, you want to do that? That comes out of your end." And this is something where obviously, look, you can't do this in the mob. But it's important when the deal gets negotiated that everybody sticks to the terms of the deal, number one, and that you get things in writing. I know the mob can't do this, but as a business owner, a lot of times we'll negotiate with people. And we saw at the end, Tony and Shlomo shook hands to close the deal. And everybody thought everyone was going to honor their word, and they didn't. And there was no contract written. Obviously, in this situation, you can't do that because it's illegal crime and all that stuff. But in the business, you got to make sure you get a contract. I've seen so many business owners make deals with their employees or make deals with another person, and it's just kind of verbally or a handshake or in an email or over a text message. If you don't get a written contract, you are screwed. You have to get that written contract. If you do not get a written contract, it's as if the deal doesn't happen, and then you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and you have to figure out what you're going to do. Reverting back a little bit too, we cut to Carmela and Charmaine kind of cleaning up from the party. It seems to be the next day they're cleaning up. Carmela's just head over heels at how great this party went, and she's telling Charmaine, Manny, I can't believe how great everything was. And oh my gosh, it was great. And you can see just on Charmaine's face that look of like disgust and frustration and anger. And she's like, oh, and Carmela almost pities her again. She's like, oh, don't worry, sweetie, you'll get on your feet. I know you're in my gorgeous house, but you'll get on your feet. And Charmaine decides to kind of really throw something in Carmela's face. The fact that when they were teenagers, that Carmela was away at the shore with her parents, and her and Tony were kind of broken up, and that Charmaine and Tony had slept together. No real need to tell her that, but she kind of throws that in her face, and she says, so don't pity me. I'm happy with the choices I made. So I think even too, and the thing I love about this, and I think the lesson to be learned here is Carmela has reached a level of success, but not a level of humbleness. And Charmaine is basically saying, look, you don't need to pity me because you're above me. I'm happy where I'm at. And sometimes, when we reach success, we think that everybody wants to be successful. Not everyone wants to be where you're at. And success is different for everybody. Like I said, for Tony and Carmela, it's flashy. It's the house, it's the cars, it's the jewelry, it's holding charity events. For Charmaine, it just maybe she seems to be someone that, for the most part, I'm making always the right ethical decisions. I'm always doing the right thing, and I'm providing for my family. That's what makes Charmaine happy. So while Carmela may feel like she's up here, Charmaine felt like they were both together because she feels like she has her level of success and status and happiness where Carmela doesn't see that. So we see Tony too. He goes. Then we come to the scene. Tony goes to tell Jackie that they're in the hotel business, and Jackie's really sick at this point. He's taking his temperature. He's pushing buttons. He doesn't realize what's going on. Tony tells him what happened with Ariel at the hotel and how they got the deal, and Shlomo not wanting to pay, and just all that stuff. And he's just not even in there. He doesn't even realize what's going on. And this is going to come up in the next phase when he goes to talk to Dr. Melfi. But next we cut to a scene with Junior and Livia. And remember what I said about Livia and Junior? They're kind of the old elders of the company, the board of directors, if you will. I wouldn't call them the C level. I would call Tony the C level. They're the board of directors, if you will, and they're kind of talking about how Junior's frustrated, and Junior wants to be in this leadership power position, if you will, but he's almost on his way out. He's almost kind of on the tail end of things, and he almost feels irrelevant in a lot of ways. And he's saying, "Man, I don't know, Christopher and Brendan, these young kids have no respect for me." You got Tony's, Junior's kind of leadership, if you will. Tony's middle management. Christopher and Brendan are the underlings, and Junior just feels like these kids just don't listen. They don't listen to me. They don't understand things. And he's now turning to Olivia, who's kind of on his level as well, for advice. And she says something that I think is interesting. She says, "Well, I don't know." She goes, "I know Tony loves Christopher." So she, as much as she puts her son down, you see this moment. We talked about this in the last couple episodes where Tony's vying for his mother's affection, and she wants to see him as being successful. And he never really does. She almost nods to that she trusts Tony at this point, which is, she never does it to Tony directly, but she does this to Junior, which is very interesting. And then she says, "Because he put my storm shutters up once." And this goes to show how important reputation is. Because Chris did one little thing one time, Livia's vouching for him. And it just goes to show that people are always watching, and people are always looking at the actions you do. So if you do someone wrong, when things come up and someone asks for advice, you never know what they're saying about you when you're not in the room. But if you do something good, you never know who's vouching for you and saying something good about you when you're not in the room. So it's always important to do things on reputation. And Brendan has never done anything for him. So she's like, "I don't know. I can't vouch for that kid. You do what you got to do." And she basically tells him, maybe Chris needs a talking to, and Brendan, he's got to go. He's got to get whacked. He's got to go out. And then we cut to the acceptance part. Tony is back in Dr. Melfi's office. And remember what I said before, when he first went in, when he was in the denial stage, he was talking about how great everything is in his life, but his body language did not match that. Now his body language and his tone are just like he's defeated. Coming off this fundraiser party, he didn't want people in his house. The deal with Shlomo, I think, not going the way he was. Maybe he's a little frustrated by that, but really he's most upset about Jackie dying. And he realizes from that last visit with Jackie that, man, this is the end. We are definitely at the end. We're definitely near the end. And he's kind of accepted it. And he's kind of saying that to Dr. Melfi. "Look, I've accepted it. I've accepted what this is." And in accepting Jackie's death, he started to accept some of who he is. And we see really one of the first points of vulnerability here for Tony. He talks about, how Shlomo called him a golem or a monster. And we saw the son, who Tony didn't want to listen to in the initial negotiations, say, "You're creating a monster, or you're creating a golem." Tony kind of sits there and has this moment of reflection. Wait, am I a monster? And in business, Tony is, right. I don't think there's any question about that. He's a murderer. He was going to cut the guy's penis off if he didn't close the deal. That's kind of monster-esque, if you will. So yeah, he is a monster in a lot of ways, but he's having that moment of self-reflection. I think he's been able to bury who he is. That's why there was some of that denial in the beginning. I think as a business owner, it's important to always be true to who you are. Because when you bury and hide things, that's when the frustration comes out, and that's when people notice that. People notice that behavior. They notice who you are, and they notice what you do. Then we cut to the scene of, kind of him talking about facing death with Dr. Melfi. And they really sort of get into this, and Tony says, "I don't have a fear of death, but if it's for a reason." But he feels like Jackie's dying for no reason. It's something that's out of his control. And I think even Ariel felt that about this some way. "I'm willing to give him my business, but not for nothing, right? Like I should get nothing." And we hear this, the idea of like getting something for nothing. And sometimes in business, we do get, rewarded for our efforts, but sometimes we don't. And sometimes we do good things for our employees and it doesn't come back to us. Sometimes we do good things for our customers and it doesn't come back to us. I've seen a lot of people, especially in 2024, starting off the new year, talking about, "Well, I'm not doing things for free anymore. I'm not letting anyone pick my brain, or I'm not letting anyone do this." But remember Christopher putting up the storm shutters that got him a win. Shlomo went to Tony because he had a reputation, maybe not of doing good, but being able to complete things. Who we are and what we do, when we give without wanting to receive back, I think there's a lot that comes back to us. So I think even in facing death, for a reason or for something, but really in your business and facing life, are we doing things for a reason, not just to get something back, but to do good? And I think if we do that, everyone in this episode was trying to figure out ways to do good, but they really weren't doing it, and good wasn't coming back to them. Carmela thought she was doing good with the fundraiser, and she ended up getting this bombshell from Charmaine. Tony thought he was doing something good by blowing up the restaurant, but all he's getting is guilt from Ari. So when we think we're doing good, but we know we're really not, and we're doing things for selfish reasons, it comes back to hurt us. But when we do the right things, we do things for good as business owners, they do come back in a good way. And we see kind of the repercussions of actions here, right? You cut to Meadows; she's singing at the choir thing. Tony comes in; he comes in a little bit late, He sits down and you even see him. He's holding Carmela's hand. She's a little annoyed that he's late. He's getting a little emotional watching her, but it cuts to a scene and you can still hear Meadow singing. And so you assume this is happening at the same time as she's singing. Christopher is buying an ice cream cone. And he ends up getting kidnapped, and these Russian guys basically beat him and threaten to kill him. He thinks it's actually they're coming from Tony because Tony's Guma is Russian, and that he confesses to getting the crystal meth for Meadow to these guys and says, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that." When actually it's the beating's coming from Junior, and they actually they pulled the trigger on a gun, but it's not loaded. And he has this sort of moment where he's scared, for his life, and they literally scare the shit out of him, literally. And then we cut to a scene of Brendan in the bathtub and Micah Palmisi's there, and he kills him. And Junior's looking on and he's watching, and it's kind of the repercussions for their actions. They were told once to listen and not steal a truck, and they went and did it again, and now they're dealing with the repercussions of our actions. And the lesson here, I think, is important that we need to look at the warnings that are given to us, and we need to look at the warnings of things that are happening, and we need to look at the warnings of the things that we're doing. So great episode here. I love the business negotiations, love all the things that are going on. Once again, the show notes here that I typed up for the episode will be available down below, so make sure you check the link there. There'll be a link to our Instagram. I will once again put another link for Omerta Cigars because I'm enjoying one on the show, and I think they're great. Make sure you check that out. Once again, I'm going to put the plea out there. If you have not subscribed or left a review for the podcast, please do that. It would be super helpful to help grow this thing and get it out to the Soprano community and get it out to the Soprano family. Shout out to Mafia Chronicles as well for sharing a lot of our content. I really appreciate the team over there, Justin and everybody, for doing that. Shout out to Hardcore Italians, repping the sweater here. Make sure that you guys check them out as well, hardcoreitalians.com. You can use code Mike10 to get 10% off. They also have some Soprano satire stuff on there that you can pick up as well. If you want to go ahead and get that. So appreciate you tuning in. For more great episodes like this, Sopranopreneur.com. For more about me, MikeFigueroa.com, and I will see you on the next episode.